Hey guys, hi, welcome back once again. My name is Vaishali, and today I'd like to talk about mind and brain, the difference between the two, and the interaction, the interconnectedness, and the overlapping of the two. So for the past few years, we all have been constantly hearing the words and the terms like mindfulness, mindlessness, the mind, the brain, and we also have been using these words quite often without actually demarcating the difference between the mind and the brain. And yet we should not forget that though there is a difference between the mind and the brain, they overlap, they interconnect also at the same time. So it had so happened that a month back I was at this particular organization taking my very first lecture with the class 12th students, and that particular lecture was understanding our psyche, the human psyche, and therein's the difference and the coagulation between the mind and the brain. So the very first question, as soon as I had introduced myself, was to ask them what did they understand by the term mind and the brain. And to my pleasant surprise, a few students in fact came up with some very beautiful, profound words. Some of them said observation. Some of them said thoughts. Some of them said belief. And I kept writing more and more and more words. And then I asked them, this is all what you think about the mind. Now, what actually is the brain? And to my surprise, in again a very pleasant way, the students replied, the brain is a very physical object. It's a physical entity. It's an organ. It has tissues and it has cells. And so I asked them, is not mind the same thing? And then they stopped, they paused, and they in fact asked me, ma'am, can you help us understand the interconnection between these two things? And I was glad that somebody had asked that. I was very glad that they were willing to exchange the information. There was an interaction. There was a constant back and forth flow of information. And it was an open space wherein this interaction, this transaction was happening, wherein they said, we have given our answers to the questions that you had put forth, but now it's our turn to question you, to inquire, and then to listen to what you've got to say in return. So when they had said mind is about thoughts, mind is about beliefs, mind is about observation, they were talking of things that are very intangible. And when they talked of the brain, they were talking of a physical entity, just like this finger, just like this palm, that can be felt, that can be held. It has got its own senses and it is attached to this arm over here. Likewise, a brain is a physical entity that is inside this skull, that is fixed inside the skull, but it is neurologically connected to the rest of the body. And it is a CPU that is constantly processing information both from within and from the outside. And mind thus is this intangible field which is both inside and outside, wherein we share our collective thoughts, wherein we share our collective beliefs, wherein we share our collective patterns, but it's also very individual. It is also very personal. So mind then actually is a place which is both interpersonal and intrapersonal, whereas a brain is a very personal individual organ that we all have, that is encapsulated over here. So those interactions that we are having with the external world need not be only with another human. They can be through a book, they can be through the environment that we live in, they can be our interaction with the nature itself, and it can be more and more and more. The mind field is unlimited, and therefore when we do not pay attention, or when we are not aware about all of the information that we are receiving and which the CPU, the brain, is processing, it can actually get quite overwhelming, and that is where mindlessness comes in. And with regards to this, I had already made a video which said uninquired mindfulness is mindlessness. So I guess when people talk about being mindful, they're actually talking about being aware of all of the information that our senses, all of our sense organs and this brain is processing all at the same time, and the kind of awareness we build towards inquiring into all of those informations that the entire system is constantly processing. And since today science tells us that 98 or even more % of the times we are functioning from the unconscious and the subconscious, I think it becomes equally important to start becoming aware, to start becoming mindful about the way we speak, even about the mind and the brain, even when we use our very hand to tell us that the mind is here, which somewhere very subconsciously translates into the brain and the mind being one and the same thing. So let us try and be a little more aware, a little more mindful about what we are providing to this CPU, because this CPU, this brain, this organ is constantly processing information, whether we are aware of it or not, even when we are asleep. So this brain over here that is connected to the entire body, and the body in return being connected to this brain, needs to be nurtured in the optimal manner possible. Just like how we tend to our plants, just like the way we nurture them by providing them enough and optimal amount of sunlight, air, water and fertilizer, and even being mindful that every plant has different requirements and we cannot standardize those things. We cannot provide the same amount of water, sunlight, air to every single plant that we have. They all have their requirements. It is equally essential to understand that this soil, that this plant that is growing, that is connected to the entire body, and the body in return being connected to this, needs to be nurtured and tended to in the most aware, optimal way possible. Because this brain and this body, which is interconnected, is constantly playing with the mind field. It is constantly interacting with the mind field, and therefore we need to become more aware when we even talk of the mind being here, because the mind is across all senses. So let's get even a little more aware when we refer to the mind being here, because the mind is not a limited space. It is not an organ, but the brain is an organ that is processing the mind constantly. Let's try and become a little more aware of all of the information that we take in, because we are involuntarily doing it. But let's get a little more aware of the way we process our information, the way the information nurtures and nourishes us, the way it enables us grow. Let's be a little mindful over there, and I will see you once again the next week. Till then, stay tuned in. And guys, if you do like the contents of my videos, please do like, share and subscribe.